Hello everyone, welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm Dr. Anthony Mazzella. On this channel, we go beyond labels and symptoms to explore the inner, often unconscious, emotional world behind narcissistic and related personality patterns. In these short clips from the full podcast, you'll get a clear, compassionate, psychodynamic insight into behavior. Whether intense feelings live in you or you're watching them in someone you care about, the goal is the same: to understand what's really going on with the emotions and approach them with perspective, compassion, and room to breathe. Here's a short clip from the podcast that highlights what this looks like in real life. What sparked your interest in understanding these narcissistic relationships or narcissistic dynamics?
Right. Well, I've been in private practice as a marriage and family therapist for over 20 years now, and it's a dynamic that comes up quite often, and particularly being a male therapist, which is a little unusual, in that we're. I think for therapists, we're probably like 25% or male or whatever. But I really got interested in how people interact with each other. And I would see what seemed to be kind of narcissistic tendencies in relationships to show up. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a male narcissistic partner with a female narcissistic partner. It can be the reverse as well. And you see that happen as well. And so just really got interested in how these interaction patterns unfold and just looking at the stories behind the people that are in these relationships and how they develop. And so all of that became very fascinating for me. And, as you know, narcissism is a tough one to crack, particularly working with people that have narcissistic tendencies. There's not a lot of willingness to want to change those things. And so then working with the kind of the people on the receiving end of those relationships of really helping them to develop the autonomy that they need and how to navigate those types of relationships, and even ultimately deciding, okay, do I want to stay in this relationship or not, which is always a big question that comes up.
Yes, absolutely. When you mention that you see these narcissistic dynamics, again, we're just starting very general, just so we have a mutual understanding of this. What does that even mean? Again, just for the audience or the people who are listening, like what are narcissistic dynamics, or what would you tend to see in these couples that you were working with?
Well, I think for one, the person on the receiving end tends to be a little bit of a wallflower, so to speak. They have this feeling of walking on eggshells a lot and feeling like they are, a lot of times there's a lot of self-blaming. Well, if I just didn't make these mistakes, then they wouldn't be so mad at me, or they wouldn't try to be that sort of thing. Also seeing a tendency to really define themselves in the relationship based on the response of the narcissistic partner. In other words, they don't really know what their own autonomy seems to be. And we seem to see that quite often. And also just not knowing how to say no to things. In other words, they will tend to do everything to please the partner who is a narcissist, has those narcissistic tendencies, and not really be clear on what it is they want for themselves. And so they have a hard time with those kinds of boundaries. And so there's just kind of a real, at least for me, kind of a real imbalance of power within the relationship.
This is already getting interesting, which I thought it would, okay? Because I want to compare this to what I see. So a couple comes in, I'm just sort of reviewing what you say. And in general, this is just in general, you could see one person maybe in the relationship who's more dominant, more in control, maybe has more power. And the other one, I think you used the phrase like a wallflower, which means they're not really feeling confident enough, right, to speak up or to assert their own sense of autonomy, right? So they come in, what sort of presenting complaint? Like, what's the problem? In other words, what even brings them in? Because I could imagine this dynamic that you just described, for mutual reasons, it's not pleasant. I'm not saying it's pleasant, but it's worked out for them for many years. So I'm imagining something must have shifted or something happened that brought them into treatment.
Right. Well, a lot of times it's, it can be something like an extramarital affair has occurred. and the narcissistic partner says, well, I want to change, it won't happen again. There's some fear of losing the relationship or the relationship breaking up. That's one scenario. And it might be even that the abuse in the relationship has escalated to the point where it's gotten physical, or somebody's actually gotten hurt, or there's a risk of the children losing children, or usually unfortunately, for a lot of times in narcissistic relationships, it's usually at a crisis state at which they seek out therapy.
Yes.
Because a lot of times they will, they're just kind of navigating it, and maybe not even realizing they're in a narcissistic relationship.
Oh, yes.
And it might be, and usually, unfortunately, it's usually some sort of big life transition event that tends to be the catalyst for people coming to therapy.
And I imagine this is where it gets very complicated because, again, I see this in my practice quite frequently as they come in, and even though you identify this dynamic, this power differential, and now let's just stay with your first example with the affair, right? But it gets more complicated quite quickly. And I'm not sure how far down this rabbit hole we want to go, but I'll just sort of open it up, which is, because this is the stuff that I hear, is that if you have a wallflower, like that kind of partner, the husband in this example, prototypical example, often feels like there's nobody there. Like that he's not getting whatever narcissistic supply, sustenance, affirmation, whatever it may be, that he's no longer getting. And this does change, by the way, over the course of a relationship, right? Oftentimes people come in and they do find a partner who's very willing to be the cheerleader and their biggest fan, but then things change over time. Right. But then now you see it gets complicated because you have a man on the one hand who's complaining, right, about so it's not even like he's the identified patient who had the affair, but as it unravels, it's like, wait, where was she in all of this? And this is, I imagine, I don't know if you've seen this, Gordon, but now I would imagine you have to juggle this in a very, very sensitive way because on the one hand, his behavior overtly was far more damaging, right, than her behavior. However, we could say hers is more covert and maybe his is more overt. But I wonder if you run into something like that where then they're just blaming one another for what led up to the affair.
Right. That happens. Yeah, that's pretty typical, I think, with a lot of situations. And that's where just that therapeutic relationship really comes into play in terms of, particularly working with couples, being able to build trust with both people in the relationship and getting to a place where you can hopefully get them to recognize, okay, this one person's done this really bad thing, but that didn't occur in a vacuum. And being able for both people to recognize, okay, what is my part in this? What am I contributing to the relationship that might have created this kind of chasm between the two people?
So, okay, so much is going on in my mind. Let me just calm myself down, but let me keep going. Because you mentioned something here, like if you have someone who has these narcissistic tendencies, it's hard for them to step into a more reflective space where they could even begin to think, what did I do? How harmful was this, right? And what comes next? Like sort of what led up to this and what can I do, let's say, to repair the damage? But on the other hand, I would imagine, again, simultaneously, because you mentioned couples, and this is always tricky work, is you said the wife in this prototypical example may not actually be so innocent, right? Maybe the way she's pulled back and she's a wallflower and not as invested in the relationship also inadvertently, right? It's not to say that this guy wouldn't have done it anyway, like, or maybe he would have done something else. Who knows, right?
Right.
But inadvertently didn't help but contributed, right? So now she could, I imagine, would feel blamed and be like, look, I am the victim here. How is it that you could possibly consider, right, or even suggest that I played some role in this dynamic? So I wonder if you bump into that at all.
Oh, yeah. Again, all the time. And that's, again, it's a matter of really getting people to a place of really understanding how their interaction patterns play off of each other. I tell couples all the time, I really don't care that much about what you're arguing about, but really looking at how you argue and that dynamic of what happens.
Yes.
So if one person comes on really strong and really gets aggressive in an argument and the other person just kind of backs down and they keep pursuing them, that just perpetuates the problem.
Yes.
Whereas you get people to a place of where they are better emotionally regulated within themselves, then they can begin a dialogue about what's going on. as much as anything, is really looking at getting people to a place of looking at how they're responding to their partner, of
Yes.
really looking at what they're doing.
Yeah.
With a narcissistic partner, the difficulty is of course there's usually a lot of gaslighting that occurs. There's you know lack of sometimes lack a lack of empathy for their partner's situation, what they're going through. And so really trying to get people to a place where they can understand the other person's internal world
Yes.
in a way that is seen with compassion, as
Oh,
opposed to
yes.
seeing it as a threat or seeing it as a criticism, or get on the defensive. One of the
Yep.
classic patterns in relationships is a pattern of criticism and defensiveness, and so
Yes.
that just cycles through. And getting them to change that up, of being able to get curious about their partner's internal world.
Yes.
And so I think that's at least in the work that I do, is I try to get people to that, is to really ask questions in the session that, things like, well, what, the person that had the affair, asking them, okay, what do you think it feels like for your partner right now? Mm-hmm. This thing has happened. So what's going on for them internally? What would you guess that's like for them? Mm-hmm. And so that really begins to change the dynamic a little bit, to hopefully elicit some empathy with each other around that.
There's still so much more to explore about this topic and related dynamics. If you're finding this discussion helpful and you want to learn more about the various facets of narcissism and related personality organizations, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video clip. If you want to do an even deeper dive, check out my podcast. I go into far more detail there. Okay, until next time, take care of yourself. Bye for now.